A brilliant black FBI agent is about to face an injustice that defies logic and challenges her spirit. Maya Thompson knew the difficulties of her role. Her very presence in the FBI was a statement in itself. She was used to the stares, the whispered doubts, and the silent judgments. Although exhausted from a long, intense investigation into a dangerous drug cartel, Maya felt proud of her progress. But today, as she drove through Charlotte, she would confront a level of prejudice that no training had prepared her for. As she navigated the bustling city streets, lost in thought, her rearview mirror suddenly lit up with flashing blue and red lights. Confused, Maya glanced down at her speedometer. She wasn't speeding, and her record was spotless. Still, she pulled over, feeling a strange tension in the air. A tall, stern-faced white officer stepped out, hand resting on his holster, as if expecting trouble. The badge on his uniform read Officer Roberts, and his cold gaze fell upon Maya with immediate suspicion. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone clipped and dismissive. "Before we dive into this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest stories. Now let's get started." Maya handed over her FBI badge confidently, expecting the routine check to be quick. "I'm Special Agent Maya Thompson, FBI," she said, her voice steady. But instead of acknowledgement, Roberts barely glanced at the badge. His mouth twisted into a smirk, and his eyes narrowed with a look she knew all too well, a look of instant dismissal. He seemed to find her badge amusing, as though her authority was a joke to him. "License and registration," Roberts repeated sharply, ignoring her credentials. Maya's brow furrowed. As an FBI agent, she rarely needed to provide further identification. She began to reach for her license but couldn't shake the chill creeping over her. The officer's gaze was cold, unyielding, as though seeing her as a threat rather than a fellow law enforcement officer. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered abruptly, his hand never leaving his holster. Maya hesitated, sensing the situation slipping out of control. "Is there a reason, officer?" she asked, keeping her tone polite but firm. But Robert's expression darkened. "Out. Now. Or I'll make you." This was no routine stop. The weight of Robert's hostility bore down on her, each word layered with an underlying message. Her authority meant nothing here. She felt the silent judgment, the condescension, a reminder that despite her achievements, some would see her as inferior. Taking a steadying breath, she opened the door and stepped out, hoping to de-escalate. As Maya stepped out of her car, she felt the weight of Robert's cold gaze bearing down on her. His expression was one of disdain, his grip tight on his holster, as if she were a dangerous criminal rather than a fellow officer. The city sounds around them seemed to fade, leaving only the tense silence between them. "Turn around and put your hands on the car," Roberts barked, his voice carrying an edge of contempt that was impossible to miss. Maya's stomach tightened. This was no ordinary stop, and he wasn't treating her like an equal. She took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. "Officer, I assure you, I'm a federal agent on duty." But Roberts cut her off, stepping closer with a sneer. "I don't care who you say you are. You think that badge makes you better than the rest of us?" His words dripped with contempt. Before she could respond, he grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back with unnecessary force. Maya winced, the pain sharp and immediate, but she remained silent, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of seeing her react. People had started to gather nearby, some with their phones out, recording. Maya could see the disbelief in their faces, but none of them moved to intervene. She felt a mix of anger and humiliation simmering beneath the surface. Here she was, a decorated FBI agent, being treated as if she were less than human. The weight of every silent judgment she had ever felt in her career seemed to press down on her at that moment. As Robert snapped the handcuffs onto her wrists, he muttered under his breath, "People like you think you can flash a badge and get away with anything." His voice was low but filled with an unmistakable venom that made Maya's blood run cold. This wasn't just about power. It was about prejudice, about reducing her to nothing in front of everyone. Maya tried to catch her breath, but Roberts shoved her forward, pressing her against the car with more force than necessary. A few onlookers gasped, and she could hear murmurs among the crowd. Her face burned, a mix of anger, shame, and defiance flashing across her mind. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, being publicly humiliated and treated as if her years of service, her hard-won respect, meant nothing. As Roberts led her towards his patrol car, she caught the eye of one bystander holding their phone, a look of pity and outrage mixed in their expression. But no one stepped forward. Maya's heart ached at the familiar isolation. Despite her status, despite her accomplishments, she was still vulnerable to this kind of abuse, still viewed as less than. As Officer Roberts shoved Maya into the back of the patrol car, a surge of anger and disbelief washed over her. She took a shaky breath, trying to regain her composure as the door slammed shut, leaving her alone in the confined space. The cityscape of Charlotte blurred through the window as the car sped off, taking her farther from any semblance of justice she knew. Maya clenched her fists, feeling the bite of the cold metal cuffs against her wrists, a painful reminder of how little her authority mattered to Roberts. The silence in the car was oppressive, broken only by the crackle of the police radio. Roberts glanced at her occasionally in the rearview mirror, his face smug, his eyes filled with an unspoken challenge. This was no simple traffic stop gone wrong. This was a calculated attempt to humiliate her. Her FBI badge, her years of service, her dedication to justice, all dismissed in the blink of an eye. "You know," Roberts sneered, catching her gaze in the mirror. "Pretending to be an FBI agent is a serious offense. Did you think that badge would let you get away with anything?" His words dripped with condescension, each one a fresh reminder of the prejudice simmering beneath the surface. Maya bit her lip, refusing to react, but her mind raced. She knew how dangerous this situation could become. This wasn't about enforcing the law. This was about proving a point, one that had everything to do with her identity, and nothing to do with justice. She couldn't afford to lose her composure now. She needed to stay calm, to think strategically. The car pulled up to a small, dimly lit precinct on the outskirts of the city. Maya felt her pulse quicken. This was no familiar FBI office or downtown precinct where protocol would be followed. It was an isolated police station, far from the scrutiny of her colleagues or her superiors. Roberts had planned this. He brought her somewhere he could operate without oversight. As Roberts yanked open the door and pulled her out, Maya steadied herself, her mind already assessing her options. She knew she would need to call for help as soon as possible. Her colleagues would be shocked to hear she'd been arrested, and she hoped the mere weight of her title would force Roberts to back down eventually. But looking at the unyielding set of his jaw, she doubted he would make this easy. As she was led into the station, the other officers barely looked up, their indifference as chilling as Roberts' hostility. Each step echoed in the quiet precinct, amplifying the isolation Maya felt. She knew she was on her own here, facing a man who saw her as a target rather than an equal. Every instinct told her that this wasn't just an arrest. It was an attempt to remind her of her place, to belittle her, to make her question everything she'd worked for. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere felt stifling, colder than the concrete walls around her. Officer Roberts led Maya down a narrow corridor to an empty, dimly lit interrogation room. The echoes of their footsteps were swallowed by the walls, and the silence thickened. Maya, still handcuffed, was shoved into a metal chair bolted to the floor. She could feel the bruises forming where Roberts had twisted her arm. The door clicked shut, and Maya glanced around. There was no phone within reach, no immediate way to contact her team. Her mind raced, seeking any possible way out. She knew that if she didn't find a way to call for help, this situation could spiral even further out of control. She took a steadying breath, determined not to let Roberts see any trace of fear. Moments later, the door opened again, and a younger officer entered. His face was pale, and his eyes darted nervously between Maya and the door. His badge read Officer Carter. She could sense that he was conflicted, perhaps uncertain about what had happened. Maya saw a sliver of an opportunity. "Officer Carter," she began, her voice calm but direct. "I am Special Agent Maya Thompson with the FBI. This is a misunderstanding, and you know it. I need to speak with my team. Carter shifted uncomfortably, glancing over his shoulder. I don't make the rules here, Agent Thompson, he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. She could tell he was hesitant, trapped between his duty and his conscience. Maya leaned forward, lowering her voice. Listen, Officer Carter, you know this isn't right. Roberts is crossing a line, and you're seeing it too. Please help me contact my colleagues. If you don't, you'll be just as complicit in his actions. Carter's jaw tightened, and he looked down, visibly struggling with the weight of her words. Maya sensed a flicker of guilt behind his conflicted expression. He was new, likely still in the early stages of his career, and Maya hoped this internal struggle might lead him to do the right thing. I'll be back, he stammered before exiting the room quickly, leaving her alone once again. The door clicked shut, and Maya felt the weight of isolation settle heavily around her. Seconds turned to minutes, and she could feel the frustration building, realizing that her options were narrowing with every passing moment. As she sat there, trying to maintain her composure, she heard faint murmurs from beyond the door. Roberts was talking to Carter, his tone low but commanding. Maya couldn't make out the exact words, but she could sense the power dynamic. Carter's voice wavered, offering half-hearted responses as if he were trying to reason with Roberts. It was clear Roberts was pressuring him to follow orders, regardless of any reservations. After several minutes, Carter returned, his face more tense than before. He avoided eye contact with Maya as he placed a clipboard on the table in front of her. I'm supposed to process you for holding, he said reluctantly, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya seized the moment. Carter, look at me, she said firmly, her tone carrying authority and urgency. You know that this isn't just some misunderstanding. Roberts is abusing his power, and he's making you a part of it. Don't let him destroy everything you've worked for by dragging you into his mess. Carter froze, his hand trembling slightly as he gripped the clipboard. For a moment, Maya saw a crack in his stoic facade. I don't have a choice, he muttered, his voice strained. Roberts, he's my superior. Maya softened her tone, choosing her words carefully. Everyone has a choice, Carter. There's always a point where you can decide to stand up for what's right. This is that point, for both of us. He looked at her, the conflict clear in his eyes, but before he could respond, the door flew open, and Roberts stormed in, his expression darkening as he glanced between them. What's taking so long, Carter? He snapped. Get her processed and into holding. Now. Carter swallowed hard, nodding stiffly as he turned back to Maya, his gaze now distant, defeated. He hesitated for a brief moment, then gestured for her to stand up. Maya held his gaze, silently pleading with him to reconsider, but he quickly looked away, unable to face her. As he led her down another corridor toward the holding cell, Maya felt a sinking feeling in her chest. Every step brought her farther from justice, farther from the world she'd sworn to protect. Yet she could sense that Carter was fighting his own battle, torn between duty and morality. She could only hope that he might yet find the courage to make the right choice. As they reached the cell, Carter hesitated again, his fingers resting lightly on the keys. He looked over his shoulder, making sure they were alone. I'm sorry, he whispered, just before locking the door. Maya looked at him, a glimmer of disappointment, and a hint of hope lingering in her gaze. It's not too late, Carter, she said softly. You can still do what's right. He gave her a small nod before hurrying away, leaving her isolated once more. Alone in the cold, sterile cell, Maya closed her eyes, steadying herself. She knew she couldn't rely solely on hope, she would need a way to fight back. As Officer Carter left Maya's cell, her words echoed in his mind. You can still do what's right. He tried to shake off the unease, but each step away from her felt heavier. He had joined the force to uphold justice, yet now, that very sense of justice seemed to slip through his fingers. In the main hall, he spotted Officer Roberts conversing with another officer. Roberts glanced his way, his eyes narrowing, a silent challenge in his gaze. Taking a deep breath, Carter approached him. Carter! Roberts called, motioning him closer. I need you to finalize the report on our suspect in holding. The emphasis on suspect carried a hint of mockery. She won't be flashing that badge around anytime soon. Carter swallowed. Are we certain she's not FBI? Her badge looked authentic, and she seems professional, he ventured, his voice uneasy. Roberts sneered, waving him off. People like her always find ways to fake it. They think a badge makes them untouchable. You're not falling for it, are you? Carter hesitated. Something about Maya's calm, her refusal to react to Robert's aggression, nagged at him. Despite the situation, she had shown dignity and patience, qualities that didn't align with deception. Back at his desk, Carter opened Maya's file. It was remarkably clean, commendations for bravery, a strong reputation within the FBI, and not a single mark against her. The more he read, the more her arrest seemed wrong. He thought of the values he'd sworn to uphold: fairness, integrity, and respect for the law. Yet Robert's actions had twisted those values into something unrecognizable. As Carter struggled with his thoughts, the precinct's noise faded into the background. He replayed every detail: the dismissal in Robert's tone, the aggressive treatment Maya had endured. Each moment weighed on him, fueling a growing sense of guilt. This wasn't justice, it was personal. Summoning his courage, Carter walked to Robert's office, catching him mid-conversation on the phone. Yes, I've got it handled. She's not going anywhere, Roberts said, his voice smug. Carter's stomach turned. When Roberts hung up, he looked at Carter with a raised eyebrow. What now, Carter? Carter took a steadying breath. Sir, I've reviewed Agent Thompson's file. She has an outstanding record. Are we sure this is necessary? Robert's gaze hardened. Are you questioning my decision? Carter held his ground. I'm just concerned that we may be crossing a line. Her record doesn't suggest she'd fake her identity. Roberts stepped closer, his voice dropping to a cold whisper. This isn't up for debate. People like her think they're above the law. Well, they're not. You'd do well to remember your place. A heavy silence fell between them as Carter absorbed Robert's words. The message was clear: challenge Roberts, and he would face consequences. But Maya's face, her steady resolve even as she was humiliated, remained etched in his mind. He felt a surge of conviction. Standing by and saying nothing made him part of the problem. With one last look at Roberts, Carter turned, his resolve hardening. He had a choice to make, and he knew it couldn't be the easy one. Back at his desk, he typed a message quickly, heart pounding. He would find a way to help Maya, no matter the cost. Late into the night, Officer Carter found himself pacing near Maya's cell. Every instinct told him to walk away, to ignore the doubts swirling in his mind. But the memory of Maya's determined gaze lingered, reminding him that inaction meant complicity. He could no longer stand by while justice was twisted by Officer Roberts' prejudice and abuse of power. Finally, he unlocked the door to Maya's cell, stepping inside quietly. Maya looked up, surprise flashing across her face, quickly replaced by a guarded expression. What are you doing? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Carter closed the door softly behind him. I can't let this go on. I know you're FBI, and I know this arrest isn't right. His voice was firm but low, eyes darting to the hallway to ensure no one overheard them. We don't have much time, but if you're willing to trust me, I can get you out of here. Maya studied him, her expression skeptical but hopeful. She had sensed his hesitation earlier, the conflict within him, but she hadn't expected him to take such a risk. Why now? She asked, needing to understand his sudden change of heart. Because I joined this job to protect people, not to be part of this, he replied, gesturing around them. Robert's actions are wrong, and he's using his authority in ways that I can't stand behind. I don't know what he's planning, but I know I can't let him ruin your life. Maya nodded, her eyes softening with appreciation. Thank you, she whispered. But how do we get out of here without anyone noticing? Carter glanced around, then pulled out his keys. We'll take the back exit. I'll use my car. It's parked in a blind spot away from the security cameras. If anyone asks, I'll say I'm transferring you to another holding site." With a sense of urgency, Carter led Maya down the deserted hallway, his heart pounding. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, every sound echoing ominously. They passed a few empty offices and the break room, but thankfully, no other officers crossed their path. Carter stayed close, his hand steady on her arm to maintain the pretense of a controlled transfer. When they reached the back exit, Carter paused, taking a breath as he scanned the dimly lit parking lot. "This is it," he said, leading her out into the cool night air. They moved quickly to his unmarked car, and he opened the back door for her. "Get in and keep your head down." As Carter slipped into the driver's seat, he felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He'd crossed the line tonight, one that couldn't be undone. But his sense of purpose was stronger than his fear. He was doing the right thing. Starting the engine, Carter pulled out slowly, avoiding the main roads as he navigated through side streets and darkened alleys. Silence filled the car, but it was a tense silence, both of them acutely aware of the risks they were taking. Every corner felt like a potential ambush, every passing car a reminder of how dangerous their situation was. Finally, Maya broke the silence. "You're risking a lot for me. I hope you know I won't forget this." Carter glanced at her in the rearview mirror, giving a brief nod. "I know. But after what I saw tonight, I couldn't just pretend I didn't see it. No one should be treated like that, especially not someone dedicated to upholding the law." As they neared the edge of town, Carter saw the faint glow of a gas station sign in the distance. He knew they couldn't keep driving indefinitely. They needed a plan and reinforcements. "I'll stop here so you can call someone from your team," he said, pulling into the dimly lit parking lot. Maya nodded, gratitude clear in her eyes. "Thank you. Truly." Carter unlocked her cuffs before she stepped out, watching as she approached the payphone. She dialed quickly, her body tense as she waited for someone to pick up on the other end. "This is Agent Thompson. I need immediate assistance," she said, her voice steady and professional. She explained the situation briefly, emphasizing her location and the urgent need for backup. Hanging up, she returned to the car. "They're sending help," she told Carter as she got back in. "They'll be here soon, but we should keep moving." Carter nodded, shifting the car into gear as they pulled back onto the road. The knowledge that backup was on its way eased the tension slightly, but he remained vigilant. He knew Roberts wouldn't just let this go once he discovered her missing. They drove in tense silence, both acutely aware of the chase that might soon follow. Every dark stretch of road felt foreboding, every set of headlights behind them sent a spike of fear through Carter. He'd risked his job, his safety, and his reputation tonight. But as he glanced at Maya, he felt a sense of resolve, a reminder that some risks were worth taking. As they reached the outskirts of the city, the first hints of dawn began to break on the horizon, casting a pale glow over the empty streets. Carter felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps they would make it out of this after all. The faint glow of dawn cast a pale light over the deserted streets as Carter's car sped through the quiet city outskirts. Inside the vehicle, the tension was palpable, each of them alert and on edge. Maya kept her eyes trained on the road ahead, mentally piecing together a plan. Her call for backup had been answered, but she knew it would take time for her FBI team to assemble and coordinate their approach. Until then, she and Carter were on their own. "Thank you for stopping," Maya said, breaking the silence. "I don't know how far Roberts will go, but he won't take this lightly. He'll be out for revenge." Carter nodded, his jaw set with resolve. "I've realized that. But I'm not backing down. He's been abusing his power for too long, and I refuse to let him drag us both down with his corruption. What's our next step?" Maya paused, choosing her words carefully. She needed to handle this with precision, ensuring Roberts faced justice while protecting Carter from backlash. "First, we need to keep moving until backup arrives. Once they're here, I'll have them document every detail, Roberts' misconduct, the illegal arrest, and your testimony. It's vital we gather solid evidence to counter any story he might spin." As they navigated the winding streets, Maya instructed Carter to take another detour, this time toward a more secluded area where they could remain out of sight until her team arrived. She noticed the lines of tension etched on Carter's face, and despite everything, she felt a surge of gratitude. Few would have taken the risks he had, especially against someone as ruthless as Roberts. They parked near an abandoned building, partially hidden by a line of trees. "This should keep us out of view for a while," Carter muttered, cutting the engine. Silence settled around them, broken only by the distant hum of the city. Both of them kept their eyes trained on the road, wary of any sign of Robert's patrol car. Maya took out her phone again, dialing a familiar number. "Agent Collins," she said when the line connected. "I'm in a compromised position and need immediate support. I have an officer here who can testify to everything. He witnessed the abuse of power and unlawful detention. Roberts is the main suspect." "Understood, Agent Thompson," came Collins' steady voice on the other end. "We've dispatched a team to your location, but it'll take some time. In the meantime, stay low and don't engage unless absolutely necessary." "Copy that," Maya replied before hanging up. She turned to Carter. "Help is on the way. They'll take our statements, but I need you to be ready. Roberts won't go down without a fight." Carter gave a tense nod. "Whatever it takes. I'll testify to everything I saw. People like Roberts, abusing their authority, it's a stain on all of us. I joined the force to protect, not to hurt." A quiet pause fell between them as Maya processed his words. For the first time since her ordeal began, she felt a glimmer of relief. Carter's willingness to stand up against Roberts was a testament to his integrity, and his courage only bolstered her own resolve to see this through. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer as they waited. Carter tapped his fingers nervously against the steering wheel, and Maya scanned their surroundings, her eyes sharp for any movement. But as the quiet settled, she found herself lost in thought, reflecting on how quickly things had spiraled out of control. This was supposed to be a routine day, yet here she was, hiding in a car with an ally she hadn't expected, bracing for a confrontation with a corrupt officer. Suddenly, the crackle of a police radio broke the silence. They both tensed, and Carter quickly muted his radio, but not before hearing the voice on the other end. "Be on the lookout for Officer Carter's vehicle. Suspect Agent Thompson is believed to be with him. Consider them armed and dangerous." Maya felt a cold wave of anger and frustration. Roberts was already manipulating the narrative, casting them both as fugitives. She met Carter's gaze, seeing the same mixture of disbelief and anger reflected in his eyes. "He's covering his tracks," Carter muttered, a bitter edge in his voice. "He's framing you, and now me too." Maya took a deep breath, forcing herself to think clearly. "This is exactly why we need to stay ahead of him. My team is coming, and when they arrive they'll cut through his lies. But until then, we have to be cautious." They resumed their silent vigil, each of them haunted by the reality of what Roberts could do. But as they sat there, Maya began drafting the steps they need to take once the backup team arrived. She reviewed what needed to be documented: the unlawful arrest, Roberts' threats, his use of excessive force. Every detail would count in proving their innocence and exposing his corruption. "Carter," she said finally, breaking the tense silence, "when this is over, there might be fallout. Even with evidence, Roberts has allies, and he'll try to discredit both of us. Are you sure you're ready for that?" He met her gaze, determination clear in his eyes. "I'd rather risk my career than stay silent while people like him trample over everything we stand for. If there's a chance to stop him, I'll take it." Maya nodded, admiration filling her expression. It was rare to find someone so unwavering in their commitment to justice, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they would see this through, no matter what it took. After what felt like an eternity, the soft sound of engines reached their ears. Maya peered out the window and spotted a line of dark SUVs approaching, her team. Relief flooded through her, but she kept her face calm as she opened the car door and stepped out to greet them. The agents exited the SUVs, and Agent Collins stepped forward, his expression grim. "Agent Thompson." "Officer Carter." We're here to assist and gather evidence. Roberts will be detained and questioned once we have what we need. Maya gave a brief nod. We have plenty of details for you. Officer Carter here witnessed everything and is willing to testify to Roberts' misconduct. But be aware, he's already trying to cast us as fugitives. He'll go to great lengths to cover this up. Collins nodded, his expression darkening. Understood. We'll proceed carefully. As Carter and Maya recounted the events in detail, her relief mixed with a sense of vindication. Finally, someone was listening. This time, Roberts wouldn't escape accountability. The agents had barely started gathering evidence when a loud screech of tires echoed down the empty road. Everyone's heads turned as a police cruiser, unmistakable with its flashing lights, sped toward them, barreling down the street with unmistakable intent. Maya's heart sank. There was no mistaking who was behind the wheel. Officer Roberts had found them. Move. It's Roberts! Maya shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. The agents immediately sprang into action, but Roberts was already closing the gap, his cruiser swerving toward them in a clear attempt to force them off balance. Get in! Yelled Carter as he opened the door of the nearest FBI vehicle. Maya scrambled into the passenger seat, with Carter behind the wheel, gripping it tightly. The rest of the agents scattered to their vehicles, but Roberts was focused solely on Maya and Carter, his eyes narrowed with a look of pure determination. As they pulled out onto the main road, Maya glanced back to see Roberts tailing them aggressively, his sirens blaring, his headlights flashing. He's not going to let us get away, she murmured, her voice tense but steady. He's lost control. Carter's grip on the wheel tightened as he sped up, taking sharp turns and weaving through narrow streets. We'll lose him, he said, though his voice held a hint of doubt. The backup team will intercept him soon. But Roberts was relentless, pushing his cruiser to the limit, keeping dangerously close. The quiet streets turned into a chaotic maze as Carter tried to shake him, turning down alleys and cutting through side streets. But no matter what route he took, Roberts seemed to anticipate their every move. In the back seat, Maya braced herself, each jolt and turn pressing her against the seat. She kept her eyes on Roberts, noting his erratic driving, the way he swerved aggressively with every turn they made. This was no longer about arresting her, it was personal. Roberts was furious, willing to risk everything to catch her and silence her. Suddenly, the road opened up into a deserted industrial area. Carter veered sharply into a wide, empty lot, hoping to lose Roberts in the maze of abandoned warehouses. We'll try to outmaneuver him here, he muttered, breathing heavily. But as they cut between the shadows of the buildings, Roberts's cruiser appeared at the entrance of the lot, headlights illuminating the area like a spotlight. He revved the engine, aiming directly at them. Carter barely had time to react as he floored the gas pedal, steering them out of the way just in time. Hang on! Carter yelled as he took a hard turn, tires squealing as they sped toward a narrow exit at the far end of the lot. But Roberts was right behind them, and as they approached the narrow gap, his cruiser scraped dangerously close to their bumper. Maya glanced back, her heart racing, every nerve in her body on edge. Just as they exited onto the main road, a loud crash echoed behind them. Roberts had miscalculated the turn, slamming into a stack of metal crates near the exit. Carter didn't slow down, keeping the car speeding forward. That might give us some time, he said, glancing in the rearview mirror. But within moments, Roberts's cruiser emerged from the wreckage, battered but still functional. His rage was palpable as he sped after them, his sirens wailing like a war cry. He's not giving up, Carter muttered, his face tense. Maya's mind raced as she considered their options. She knew they couldn't outrun Roberts forever, especially with him so determined. Carter, take the highway, she said, a plan forming in her mind. We'll draw him out. I know a spot near the outskirts where we can try to ambush him with backup. Carter nodded, understanding. He swerved onto the highway entrance ramp, pressing the gas pedal to the floor. The engine roared as they accelerated, but Roberts was still right behind them, his headlights glaring in the rearview mirror. Stay calm, Maya murmured, more to herself than anyone else. We're almost there. They raced along the highway, the city lights fading into the distance as they neared the secluded area Maya had in mind. She could see it ahead, a wide turnoff surrounded by dense trees, where they could lie in wait if they managed to get there first. As they approached the turnoff, Carter slowed just enough to make the sharp turn, pulling off the highway and cutting the headlights. He drove them a short distance into the woods, concealing the car in the shadows. They waited, listening intently as Roberts's cruiser approached, his lights flashing wildly. "He's almost here," Carter whispered, his eyes fixed on the faint glow of headlights. They heard the roar of his engine as he sped past their hiding spot, momentarily losing track of them. But it wouldn't be long before he circled back. Maya used the brief moment to grab her phone and send a quick message to Agent Collins. "We're at the highway turnoff. Roberts is in pursuit. Requesting immediate backup." She barely had time to hit send before the sound of Roberts's cruiser grew louder again, drawing closer. As the cruiser reappeared, Roberts caught sight of their car in the shadows, and his engine roared to life once more. This time, there was a dangerous glint in his eyes, a sign that he was willing to end this chase by any means necessary. Carter and Maya braced themselves as Roberts accelerated toward them, his intentions clear. Carter gripped the wheel, ready to swerve if needed, but just then, the sound of additional engines filled the air. A line of dark SUVs appeared, headlights cutting through the darkness as Agent Collins and his team arrived, surrounding Roberts. "Step out of the vehicle, Roberts!" Collins commanded over a loudspeaker, his voice echoing through the area. Roberts froze, the realization of his situation dawning on him. For a moment, he sat motionless, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. But then, with a resigned expression, he stepped out of his cruiser, hands raised. Maya exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the chase lift from her shoulders. Carter looked at her, relief evident in his eyes. "It's over," he said softly, barely able to believe it. But Maya knew this was just the beginning of a long road ahead. With Roberts now in custody, the real work of exposing his corruption could finally begin. The forest stretched dark and silent around them as Carter steered the car off the narrow, rugged road into the dense trees. They had escaped Roberts' immediate line of sight, but Maya and Carter both knew he would follow soon. The car lights went off as they drove deeper into the woods, concealing themselves within the dense foliage and shadows. Carter parked the car behind a cluster of thick trees, and they both got out, quietly closing the doors behind them. "Here," Maya whispered, signaling for Carter to follow her away from the car. They crept through the underbrush, moving further into the darkness. Maya's instincts told her that staying hidden was their best chance to survive until backup arrived, but the vastness of the forest and the complete silence around them gave her an eerie feeling. They could hear only the rustling of leaves under their feet and the distant calls of nocturnal animals, adding to the tense atmosphere. Carter glanced at Maya, his face pale but determined. "If Roberts finds us here, he won't hesitate," he said, his voice barely audible. "He's past the point of caring about the law." Maya nodded, her jaw clenched. "Then we need to stay one step ahead of him. Let's split up and stay low. If he catches sight of one of us, the other can still make it out and call for backup." They exchanged a silent nod, then parted ways, slipping further into the shadows. Maya crouched low behind a thick tree, steadying her breathing and listening intently. Every crackling twig and rustle seemed amplified in the darkness. Her mind raced through strategies, each one a precarious balance between staying hidden and being ready to confront Roberts if he found her. Suddenly, the distant crunch of footsteps broke the silence. Maya tensed, pressing herself closer to the ground. The steps were slow, methodical, moving in her direction. The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, casting long shadows across the trees, and Maya realized with a jolt that Roberts was only a few yards away. "Come out, Thompson," Roberts' voice echoed, low and taunting. "You can't hide forever. You're not as clever as you think you are." Maya held her breath, keeping her body perfectly still. She knew that engaging him now would be reckless, especially while she was unarmed. She had to wait to be patient. She reminded herself that help was on the way and that her best chance was to stay hidden until then. Robert's footsteps drew closer, his flashlight sweeping over the trees. He paused near her hiding spot, the beam lingering just inches from her face, though she remained concealed in the darkness. "You think you're untouchable with that FBI badge, don't you?" Robert sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "People like you, always thinking you're better than the rest of us." Maya felt a surge of anger but forced herself to stay silent. She knew that if she responded, she would give away her position. Roberts continued moving, his footsteps receding as he searched the area. She exhaled slowly, relief flooding her as the flashlight faded further into the distance. She took the opportunity to creep through the trees, moving as silently as possible, putting more distance between herself and Roberts. But the reprieve was brief. Suddenly, a loud snap echoed through the forest as Carter, hidden nearby, accidentally stepped on a fallen branch. Robert's flashlight swung in the direction of the sound, his eyes narrowing with predatory focus. Well, he said, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Looks like I found one of you." Maya's heart raced as she watched from her hiding place. She could see Carter trying to back away, but Roberts was closing in too quickly. She knew that if she didn't intervene, Carter wouldn't stand a chance against Roberts, who was armed and increasingly unhinged. Taking a deep breath, Maya stood up from her hiding place, stepping into view. "Roberts!" she called, her voice strong and clear. His head whipped around, surprise flickering across his face before it was replaced by a twisted grin. "There you are," he sneered, raising his weapon. "Trying to play hero, Agent Thompson?" Maya held her hands up, taking a step forward to draw his attention fully onto her and away from Carter. "It's over, Roberts," she said, her tone firm. "You've already crossed too many lines. Put down the gun, and let's end this before it gets worse." Roberts laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the trees. "Worse? You think I care about worse at this point? You don't understand. You're just another obstacle, another threat to my authority. And I don't tolerate threats." With a sudden burst of fury, he lunged toward her, his weapon aimed directly at her. Maya dove to the side, rolling behind a fallen log as Roberts fired, the bullet thudding into the ground where she had just been standing. She scrambled to her feet, weaving between the trees, using the darkness as cover. Carter, taking advantage of Roberts' distraction, crept around, trying to approach Roberts from behind. Maya caught sight of him and gave a subtle nod, signaling for him to wait for the right moment. She needed to keep Roberts' attention focused on her, giving Carter the chance to intervene. Roberts advanced slowly, his weapon ready. "You're not getting away this time, Thompson. No one's coming to save you. It's just you and me, and we both know how this ends." Maya kept moving, circling him, buying time. She could feel the tension in the air, the sense that everything was about to reach a breaking point. Finally, she caught sight of Carter positioned directly behind Roberts, and with a quick signal, he launched himself forward, grabbing Roberts' arm and forcing it upward just as Roberts fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the forest as Roberts struggled against Carter's grip. Maya seized the opportunity, rushing forward and using all her strength to knock the gun from Roberts' hand. It clattered to the ground, and Robert staggered, his eyes blazing with fury. "You think you can stop me?" he snarled, lunging toward her, fists swinging. Maya dodged, countering with a precise strike that left him momentarily dazed. Together, she and Carter forced him to the ground, pinning him as he thrashed against them. Just then, the sound of approaching footsteps and flashlights flooded the area as the backup team arrived, their voices calling out. Relief washed over Maya as the agents surrounded them, securing Roberts in handcuffs and taking him into custody. As she stood, catching her breath, Maya looked at Carter, a grateful smile crossing her face. "We did it," she said softly, her voice filled with relief. Carter nodded, visibly exhausted but relieved. "I couldn't have done it without you." The agents led Roberts away, his furious protest fading into the background as Maya and Carter finally allowed themselves to feel the weight of what they had accomplished. In the heart of the forest, with dawn breaking, They knew they had faced not just a corrupt officer but a deeply rooted injustice, and they had emerged stronger for it. The dawn light cut through the trees as Roberts was forced into a squad car, his hands cuffed behind his back, his furious gaze fixed on Maya and Carter. His downfall was imminent, and the gravity of what he had done hung heavily in the air, palpable to everyone who had witnessed the chaos of the night. For the first time, his authority was shattered, his control slipping through his fingers. Agent Collins stepped forward, nodding at Maya and Carter with a look of relief and respect. "You did good work here. You both showed incredible restraint and courage." His voice carried a tone of pride as he looked between the two, clearly acknowledging the risks they had taken to expose the truth. Maya took a deep breath, glancing at Carter with gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without support." Roberts was prepared to go to any length to hide his corruption. She felt a surge of relief as she spoke, the weight of the night's ordeal beginning to lift from her shoulders. Roberts, still held tightly by the agents, snarled, "You think this is over? People like you don't get to decide how things work here." His words were filled with anger and defiance, but there was a hint of desperation in his eyes, as though he realized his power was finally slipping away for good. Agent Collins looked directly at Roberts, his expression stern. "It's over, Roberts. The evidence against you is undeniable. You abused your power, targeted your own colleagues, and disgraced this department. You'll answer for every violation, every act of intimidation." His voice was firm, each word striking Roberts like a blow. Roberts struggled against his restraints, his fury spilling over. "People like her," he spat, nodding toward Maya, "think they can waltz into our world and change the rules. But you're all just fools. You don't understand how this city works." Collins shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "The rules are the same for everyone, Roberts. There's no place in this city or this department for officers who think they're above the law." He turned to the other agents, signaling them to escort Roberts to the transport vehicle. As Roberts was led away, his voice trailed off, his threats and insults fading into the background. Maya and Carter watched in silence, both feeling a profound sense of justice. This was a victory, not only for them but for everyone who believed in accountability and equality within law enforcement. Once Roberts was out of sight, Maya turned to Collins. "Thank you for coming through. We both know how close this came to ending badly." Collins nodded, his expression grave but calm. "You were up against a formidable opponent, Maya. And you handled it with strength. We'll make sure Roberts faces the consequences of his actions, but the fact that you both stood your ground, people will remember this." Carter, who had been silent, finally spoke up, his voice filled with resolve. "I joined the force to protect people, not to turn a blind eye to corruption. Seeing what Roberts was capable of, I realized that staying silent would only make me complicit. Thank you for supporting us in this." Collins gave him a reassuring smile. "You did the right thing, Carter. Integrity means standing up, even when it's uncomfortable, and you've shown that you understand that." They stood there for a moment, a rare sense of calm settling over them. The forest around them felt peaceful, the tension and darkness of the night finally giving way to a quiet morning. Maya knew that this moment marked a turning point, not only in her career but in her understanding of what it truly meant to fight for justice. As they walked back toward the remaining vehicles, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle with Roberts had taken a toll, but it had also reaffirmed her commitment to stand against corruption, no matter the cost. She looked at Carter, who shared her expression of determination, and knew that their fight had meant something significant. They would carry the scars of this night with them, but they would also carry the knowledge that justice, while difficult, was worth every sacrifice. For Maya, this was not just a victory over one corrupt officer, it was a step toward a more just and accountable system. And with allies like Carter and Collins, she knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the sun rose over the quiet streets, Maya stood alone for a moment, taking in the serenity of the morning. The events of the night weighed on her, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This experience hadn't just been about bringing a corrupt officer to justice. It had been about defending the integrity of her badge, and about standing up for the principles that had drawn her to law enforcement in the first place. Turning back to her car, she glanced over at Carter, who was talking with Agent Collins, both looking tired yet relieved. Maya felt grateful for Carter's courage, for his decision to act despite the personal risks involved. She understood now more than ever that true justice often required the strength to confront even those within one's own ranks, to protect what was right. Her journey wasn't over, she realized. There would be more challenges, more days where she would have to face resistance and prejudice. But tonight had shown her the power of resilience, the importance of allies, and the undeniable value of persistence in the pursuit of justice. She knew that each step she took now would make a difference, not just for herself, but for those who would come after her. As Maya took a deep breath, a quiet smile crossed her face. The road ahead might be difficult, but she was ready for it. She had proven to herself, and to those around her, that no injustice would stand unchallenged. Thank you for watching this story. If it resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel to hear more stories of courage and resilience. Together, we can keep spreading awareness, one story at a time.